Okay, hi folks. Christine Weber here. I'm going to be talking today a little bit about polyvagal theory and some better ways that yoga teachers can describe what's going on autonomically. So, the first thing I want to say is that I know this, I've been talking about this for months now, but people keep sending me emails and messages on social media saying, hey, I don't quite understand. Like, I still like polyvagal theory. Why can't I use it? So I want to say like that it's totally understandable because we are essentially educators and teachers, and in some cases clinicians. Like, we work one-on-one with people sometimes. So, like, well, I'm not a scientist. We're not scientists. We can interpret the science. We can try to understand it better. I think that's really helpful. And I think explaining it well to our students is helpful. And it's not that complicated that we can't do that. But we have to rely on the scientists to deliver the information so that we can teach it right, you know? And I think polyvagal theory is so helpful. Like, one of the beautiful things that Stephen Porges did was give us language to be able to discuss this stuff, you know? And he really named what is going on in the body. So like, he brought it to the public. So beautiful. And then as the theory starts getting critiqued, which is always going to happen with theories, and new information emerges, we have to change. And there's nothing, you know, that's life. Like, we have to change the way we talk about things. We have to bring a new perspective. We have to bring in new perspectives. We have to bring in more accurate information. So, so that's that I feel really good about. The challenge I have with polyvagal theory is that the people who created this theory had been critiqued for nearly 20 years quite rigorously. I didn't learn about polyvagal theory until 2011, but in 2007, it was already being critiqued and saying you shouldn't talk about these things this way. So why in 2011 was I taught something inaccurate? That makes me uncomfortable. And it didn't have to be like that, you know? So so there's part of me that's like, I love polyvagal theory. It's so helpful. It really helps people like validate and understand their feelings and realize they're not crazy. And then on the other hand, like, we should have changed the language a long time ago. So I'm here today with, and I'm going to be adding some, I'll add, after I finish this, I'll add some description that I hope will help you. And I'll also publish the description I wrote on Substack, again, as a way to help yoga teachers understand the problems with polyvagal theory and why we have to change the way we're talking about it, okay? If you're talking about it all. Some people don't talk about it at all, but a lot of us who are in that yoga/mental health space have been using it for a long time. Okay, so I'm gonna break this down into 5 points. The first point is that a dorsal vagal shutdown is not accurate. We want to not talk about shutdown as coming from the dorsal vagal or the dorsal vagal nucleus. We want to talk about it as rather a hypometabolic state. I'm going to go into these in more detail. Let me just give you these 5 first, okay? So number 1 is dorsal vagal shutdown is not accurate. Talk about it as hypometabolism. 2, the states cannot be mapped neatly as dorsal vagal, sympathetic, and ventral vagal. I'll talk about why in a moment. 3, the evolutionary story is way outdated. In the 1960s, we learned about triune brain. In the 1970s, that was considered not useful anymore. Evolution is not a straight line. Number 4, the idea of vagal tone is a big problem. It's only talking about your heart, not the rest of the parasympathetic system. And number 5, being a useful clinical model is not the same thing as being neurophysiologically accurate. So we have to separate those 2 things so we can understand it better. Okay, so if you want to stick around, I'm going to break all these down. So the first one is about dorsal vagal shutdown. That's perhaps the strongest critique. So in polyvagal theory, it's spelled out that the first thing we seek is safety, right? So we seek safety through social engagement, and that's broken up into the ventral vagal part of the nervous system. Now, that's not accurate because feeling safe is not just a function of the ventral vagal. And I shouldn't say it's not just a function because I don't think that they ever said that in polyvagal theory. It's not guided by ventral vagal. It is one element that we need. And I think one of the big problems that happens here is that there's a conflation between the mind and the brain and the nervous system. So we go, there's this brain, there's this nervous system stuff is going on in my body. It must be the vagus nerve. And that's why I feel socially engaged. But it's like that. It's so simplistic because the mind is not the brain. The mind has to do with our psychology, and it is not well understood by the neurosciences. It is well understood by the psychologists, right? So, and even that is somewhat questionable. The people who really understand the mind are the yogis, I would suggest. But anyway, so we have to just be a little more circumspect about this division between the vagus nerve and then division between the states. It doesn't really work. Dorsal vagal shutdown is a big problem because shutdown, when you go into this feeling of like depression or collapse or weakness or fatigue, and it's psychological, again, it's a psychological state, but also it is not just the dorsal vagus nerve, and it's not just guided by that. It's guided by brainstem defense circuits, sympathetic withdrawal, baroreflex regulation, which has to do with your blood pressure, motor inhibition, meaning like, the motor nucleus or the signals you're getting from your brain to move your body are inhibited, not working well, neuroendocrine-immune shifts, as well as threat perception, and of course the mind, which is not the brain. So all of these things are involved in dorsal vagal shutdown. A better term for dorsal vagal shutdown is actually hypometabolism, a hypometabolic state. And we can all relate to that. Like the system, the metabolism is not working optimally. It has gone into this decreased metabolic state, like a bear, you could say. That's kind of wrong, actually, because I'm talking about psychology. So X that part. I didn't say that. But that's what we think about with hypometabolism. It's like, there's this lack of energy. And it involves many systems, not just the dorsal vagus nerve. So that's the big thing to start there. The dorsal vagal shutdown is not an accurate description of what happens when we go into a hypometabolic state initiated by some kind of psychological experience, right? Now, the next big point, the states cannot be mapped neatly, is very important. Then I've watched as the Polyvagal Institute has changed the way they've thought about this. They used to talk about the polyvagal ladder, and many people are still out there talking about the polyvagal ladder. It's a nice metaphor that we're in shutdown. We need some energy to get out of shutdown, and that can help us back to feeling safe and socially engaged. So that shutdown, the way it was described in polyvagal theory, is dorsal vagal. And then the activation is described as sympathetic nervous system, fight or flight energy, right? And then the social engagement is described as ventral vagal. I feel safe, I feel connected. Lovely description, just not accurate anatomically. So, and the other thing is somebody can be shut down, but they still feel alert. They're still part of the sympathetic nervous system working. Somebody can feel socially engaged, but also they might have some activation going on in the system. There might be some alertness and activated. Somebody can be collapsed, but then they still have anxiety. So like those states are mixed. So I watched as Polyvagal Institute acknowledged that and went from the ladder to these three concentric circuits, and they were trying to describe more of a fuller picture of it, which I think was a good move. But they maintain the language of sympathetic, ventral vagal, and dorsal vagal in those three concentric circles, and that really is not accurate. So we have to use other terms for that, or even leave the terms out completely and talk about it in just psychological terms. There's nothing wrong with talking about it in psychological terms. Like, it makes sense, Okay, the third big point is about evolution. and the evolutionary story being outdated. So back in the 1960s, there was a neuroscientist whose name was Paul MacLean, and he developed this theory called the triune brain theory. And the triune brain theory said that you have this brainstem, which is very reptilian, it's instinctual, it's about survival. And the hand model of the brain comes from Dan Siegel, and it's a lovely psychoeducational tool, but it's outdated now. I'm not using it anymore. But it used to be you have this survival, this brainstem survival. And then the thumb represented the limbic brain, which again, no longer an accurate term. Scientists are not talking about the limbic brain for the most part. They talked about it as the emotional parts of the brain. For example, the anterior cingulate cortex and the amygdala and the hippocampus are all part of this limbic structures, right? And then they talk about the cortex on top, which is the mammalian or higher thought brain, right? So not mammalian, it's neo-mammalian. So this guy, Paul MacLean, talked about reptilian brain, paleo-mammalian, emotional, neo-mammalian, rational thought human. It's such a lovely model, but we shouldn't use it anymore. I've been using it for years. I'm not using it anymore because it's a simplistic story that's not accurate. If you look at evolution, it's a tree. You know, the reptiles and birds are over here, and then you have, you know, whatever, I don't know, not monkeys, but like dogs over here, and elk and deer is over here, and, you know, monkeys and humans over here. So you didn't go from being a reptile to being a human. It's not a straight line. It's a big tree of evolution. And so it's really inaccurate to use this idea that you have a reptile in your brain and then a dog or a cat and then a human. That it doesn't work like that. That all of the animals have these different structures in the brain. They don't have as much cortex. Now, in the 1970s, that triune brain theory was discounted, but it was so popular and so compelling that people are still using the triune brain today. We have to get out of that. Evolution does not tell us that emotions are handled by the limbic brain. And neuroscientists are saying emotions are a whole brain, whole body process rather than just this one part of your brain, the limbic system. So the neuroscientists now are not talking about the limbic brain anymore. We have to stop talking about the limbic brain. It's not helpful. The evolutionary story is old, it's outdated, and we're moving to a story of understanding a much more complex and beautiful and you know, distributed experience of emotions in the brain as well as in the body. And I think that's where we're going. It's kind of exciting. Like, I'll talk about that at the end, but let me get to point number 4, which is about vagal tone. So I learned about vagal tone, and what I learned and what I've been teaching, was that the vagus nerve innervates the heart. And the way they measure vagal tone is by your heart rate variability. Respiratory sinus arrhythmia, I'm not going to get into, but let's talk about heart rate variability. And people have all these gadgets they put on to measure their heart rate variability. It got so popular out there. Heart rate variability is a measure of good vagal tone, which means that you are resilient and good at self-regulation, and you know, you have like a lot of capacity. That was the idea. It's a huge problem, and we need to scrub the word vagal tone out of our language as yoga people, because it's not about vagal tone anymore. We really stop using that term. I'll tell you what to use in a moment, but let me explain it, because the only thing that heart rate variability measures is the cardiac vagal tone. So how healthy your heart is. And that there's some accuracy in that. But the heart rate is deeply influenced by breathing. And those of you who've messed around with the HRV monitors or even blood pressure know that you can change it based on your breathing, especially if you're a yogi and you do a lot of breathing practices, right? So HRV is not just about your vagus nerve. It's also about respiration. It's about your posture that will influence your HRV, your age, your fitness, medications you're taking. If you have illnesses going on, what's going on with your metabolism in the moment, your attention, your emotions, and your mind, your mental state. All of that is going to influence your HRV. So it's a little reductive to say HRV is a measure of, it's very reductive, I would say, is a measure of vagal tone. And instead of saying vagal tone, which I highly recommend you scrub that language from your the way that you teach, we can talk about something called autonomic flexibility, which maps to psychological flexibility in some ways. It's just like the capacity of my nervous system to return to homeostasis after some stressor, whether it's a happy stressor or an unhappy stressor. The capacity of my nervous system to return to homeostasis is a good measure of autonomic flexibility, right? And autonomic flexibility is a better term than vagal tone. So again, I hope that's helpful. I hope that helps you to shift your language and stop using vagal tone and start using autonomic flexibility. You can also just, if you don't want to use something scientific, you can just say self-regulatory capacity. Okay, so now I'm on number 5. Number 5 is about being a useful psychoeducational tool. Is a clinically tool, if the same thing, is not the same thing as being neuroscientifically accurate. So I think that's important to also acknowledge. Like it's just like, I love this hand model, reptile and then emotions and then the brain, and we want our brain to work. It's so like neat and so fun, but it's not accurate. So it's not accurate neuroanatomically. So we have to come up with different ways. We can say like, oh, well, there's a part of you. I mean, if you want to use the hand model, make it a puppet. Like this is the happy puppet, and this is the flip your lid, unhappy puppet, and this is the shutdown puppet. But I don't need to assign that to neurophysiology because it's not accurate. So being something useful clinically is not the same thing as being accurate, and we need to come up with new metaphors. That's one thing I'm so excited about what's coming next, because there are going to be all these incredible, innovative minds, clinicians, as well as neuroscientists who are going to give us better language to describe this stuff. And it's wonderful. So if we can think about it that way, it's an evolution. Then we don't have to be so attached and holding on so tight to outdated models, because it's outdated, right? Some people now I want to talk about why this matters. And the thing is, I came to yoga as a very vulnerable person with eating disorders, with depression. A lot of people come to yoga with their vulnerabilities, with their traumas, with their different psychological challenges. And then if we're saying to them, oh, here's polyvagal theory, this will help explain what's going on with you, that's okay. I mean, people want to know what's going on, and they want to feel better about themselves and know that this is like a normal human thing. But if you're working with somebody vulnerable and then you're giving them inaccurate information, it's just like, that's just more playing right into their trust issues. We don't want to do that. And also the foundational principle of yoga is satya, or honesty. And it asks us to update our language so that we are speaking from a place where we're giving people better information. We're giving them, we can say things like, oh, we don't know entirely how these things, the mechanisms of how these things work, but it certainly has to do with the nervous system. I have to update a lot of the stuff that I've written and that my courses that I've put out because of these changes in polyvagal theory. So I hope you can understand why I'm so passionate about this. So, and I want to say that yoga practice works. We can explain it very simply in simple, more accurate terms, like shutdown is hypometabolic state, and vagal tone is really autonomic flexibility. And yoga doesn't really need polyvagal theory to explain it. We can explain yoga with our language and our models. One final thing I want to say before I finish for today, and I hope that you've gotten this far and you've kept watching, or if you're reading afterwards, I hope you've read everything I wrote in the description. So one final thing I want to say is that it is my sincere belief that Stephen Porges is a genius who helped to bring autonomic states to the public and help the population understand that it's normal to have these different states and these different feelings. And I also believe that he intuited something that is extraordinary that came from the yoga teachings, which is that the experiences of emotion are largely experienced in the major chakras along the midline of the body. And for that, I'm extremely grateful for his work. And I'm very excited to see how science evolves this work, continues the conversation, and finds more accurate ways to validate what the yogis understood intuitively and described in their texts. I would love to hear from you. Please leave a comment. Thank you so much for listening, and be well.